Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
In her 20s, Daria was a real star, not in movies or television, but in her department. But which one? Journalism at the country's leading university and shine on the blue screens could well be the next stage for the ambitious girl. After all, it was from this faculty came out those who many of us now call stars. Famous TV presenters, journalists. Daria also had a firm intention to build a successful career. Although you cannot say that in such a cute head can be serious thoughts. Outwardly, she was a petite blonde with a doll-like pilot and a bay of laughter. Like a magnet, she attracted the attention of everyone around her, cast admiring glances of guys and enviously and whispered her girls. It seemed that she needed only entertainment, suitors, and endless fun. Nevertheless, Daria studied quite well and tried to pick up not just any suitors, but those with a higher status and more money. And for the third week, she met with Kevin, the son of very wealthy parents. Girls, don't jinx it. Don't take the guy away. What kind of spell? Wouldn't the conspirators do it? She whispered to her friends. He's definitely not going to leave me. He's got his eye on me. He spares no expense. We went to a restaurant yesterday that I didn't know what to choose from a menu of expensive dishes. And you don't know what you're gonna eat. It's called molecular cuisine. What's that? Miranda asked, the main loser of the course, as she was called, and as she considered herself. Her studies were going swimmingly. She had no success with the boys, neither skin nor face. As they say it is when they make a hell of a lot of things out of the usual products, Daria said with a sense of superiority as the possessor of secret knowledge. They have bread in the form of foam, spaghetti in the form of oranges, salad in the form of sauce. The meat looks like a brownie and the coffee is solid. It's all unusual, of course, but kind of weird and costs crazy money. It's a good thing Kevin's not greedy. Daria did not fail to emphasize her own importance and her ownership of her beau. Girls, let's go in. The seminar is starting. An elderly political science teacher stood in the doorway, preparing to close it. Do you need a separate invitation? He turned to the girl group with Daria at the head. Hey, James, take your beauty. Waving his hand, he beckoned to the red-headed boy. Time for the ladies to get their heads in the game. It's not all about counting. Daria, the girls really should go, James said softly. He was the head of the group at the journalism department. Students from the radio and television department. He was now beginning his third year of study. This silent, quiet guy was respected by his classmates. He studied well, was always polite, disciplined and responsible, able to settle disputable situations. That is, as a headman, he was absolutely in his place. He had only one weakness. Daria, everyone knew that he had been in love with her for a long time, and absolutely hopelessly. After all, it was simply impossible to imagine them as a couple. Bright, energetic beauty, Daria just outshined phlegmatic James with his unpleasant facial features. Well, except for the snub nose a little added to its zest. The girl was well aware of the headman's feelings and skillfully used the sigh. She did not give him direct hopes, but fueled his interest with coquetry and constantly filled him with requests for a little help on various occasions. That in the dean's office to patronize for a place in the dormitory, to help things to transfer to a separate apartment, which the girl, according to the legend, rented parents. In fact, Daria lived successfully at the expense of rich lovers in the plural, not because there were several of them at once. They simply replaced each other so quickly that even Daria's closest friends were confused by the names of her suitors, not having time to remember the next one. Daria herself saw nothing wrong in it. Going home with a new suitor, she calmly caught the eyes of grandmothers on the bench at the entrance, and usually sharp-tongued elderly women. In this case, even words suitable for her were not found. They were silently discouraged and even looked with mild horror at a girl who was behaving so shamelessly. What should I be shy of and who? Old faces or the young classmates? They're all jealous of me. They're incapable of attracting a man themselves. They're just grumpy, angry grumblers. So rudely, Daria explained her position in conversations with her closest friends. In public, of course, such words she did not allow herself. She behaved not like a boy, but like a girl, well-mannered, educated, observing the rules of behavior accepted in high society. We counted ourselves, considered herself this special blue blood, which is allowed what is not allowed plebeians. How in this hypocritical could fall in love with intelligent James, it is incomprehensible. Love is evil only and remains to say he fell in love with her. An image he saw at the entrance exam. The applicants were singing over their essays, stooping, stopping, thinking, chewing on pens or sheets, starting to write again. Against this slightly nervous background stood out a calm white girl with a ponytail, sitting in the rightmost row by the window. With her left hand, she picked up her chin, leaned on the desk, and calmly wrote her text. From time to time, she looked out of the window for a couple of seconds, and as if seeing something important there, continued writing without hurrying or getting nervous. The summer sun illuminated her head. The rays shone through the white strands, knocked out of the ponytail falling on her arm and framing her face. It seemed as if the girl was glowing. Is that what a light head means? With a smile thought then for the love of James. He was so enchanted by the beautiful stranger that he could hardly tear his gaze away from her to finish his essay. After the exam, when the applicants, having passed the essay, with a sense of relief scattered from the room, he wanted to approach the girl, but found no reason, which he regretted all the 2 months that passed before the beginning of his studies. He had passed the competition, but could the stranger? He didn't know the girl's last name, so he couldn't check the enrollment lists. The more was his happiness when in September he saw his princess at the first introductory pair. James didn't hesitate. After the lectures, he came over, got acquainted, and never left Daria's side. Daria even went on a date with him because it was surprising for both of them. James was not sure that the girl would agree, but decided to try his luck and let her know how he felt. He invited Daria to the theater, and Miranda refused. The girl also surprised herself. After all, the beau was not to her taste. Too timid, too poor by her standards, but useful. Daria thought going to the performance of Sweet Boy will provide him with good memories. This evening will come in handy somehow, cynically enough, the girl reasoned. Her plan had worked. James was delighted with her companion's grace, sense of humor, and fell in love even more, although this date was the first and only one. Further, Daria kept the young man at a distance, but did not stop communicating. Realizing that she could not find a second such a reliable friend, especially among men. They perceived the girl in a consumerist way, thinking more about their own satisfaction than about Daria's needs. By the end of the 3rd year, James and Daria had an established relationship. He silently loves, and she allows it. And James, in turn, allowed her a lot of things as well. Only with a minus sign of inattention and non-committal towards him, arrogance in communication with other people, frivolous behavior with jumps from bunk to bunk. But one day patience broke. Even he had Daria having an affair with a faculty member. The whole university was whispering about it. Not old professor lost his head from the young student waited for her near the classroom. In between classes in the evenings, they were seen then in a restaurant, then at the opera, then walking hand in hand in the park. Remarkably, he taught philosophy, but all his reason and analytical thinking seemed to fly away with naive, amorous eyes. He looked at his young companion, not believing his happiness, in which, however, and no one believed. Knowing Daria's reputation, she didn't quite understand why she was wasting so much time on a man who had no prospects for her. He was completely out of her league. Of course, she was interested in talking to him. Flattered to have the attention of an intelligent man. My sweet philosopher. That's what she called him in person, and out of sight without a name. He had his own apartment, a substantial professor's salary. But that wasn't enough for Daria. She was looking forward to a comfortable existence. She wanted to live large to get everything she wanted, and fast. About a month she stayed in the shop window with her ardent but aged sigh. Probably would have lasted longer, but I met Kevin. He's the love of my life. As something even a little doomed, thought she, having seen for the first time Blue-Eyed Blonde. It happened at night in a club, where Daria was invited to a birthday party by a girlfriend. The girl had refused as best she could. She didn't want any activity at all. First, she had a busy day at the university, Then she spent a stormy evening with the professor of the past, and not at all in philosophical disputes. In the morning, she had to get up early for lectures, but the girlfriend said that it was her 20th anniversary and she would be very offended if on such a significant day Daria would not be there. So I had to go. Usually Daria was the leader of the company, but this time she was tired. She just sat at the bar, holding out a cocktail. While her friends were dancing, Kevin came over to her. Word after word, and in the morning they parted as good friends. They agreed to meet again tonight. Daria was happy. It seemed to her that she had finally met the man of her dreams, and she informed her sweet philosopher about it. A couple of hours later, the man was already pitiful to look at. His cozy world had collapsed. The day before, he had possessed a young, gorgeous beauty. He made, though cautiously, plans for future life together, and in an instant happiness disappeared together with Daria, who disappeared both figuratively and literally in the university, did not appear. She didn't answer his calls. The professor simply decided to escape from reality. He got drunk. At first, he came to his classes with a smell. Then he didn't show up to class unannounced at all. Then he came to the university in such a state that he was in a bad way. The management tolerated this outrage for a month and fired him. Then he was lost. Rumor had it that he never recovered from the blow. Never found a decent job. Got by on a night watchman's wages. Everybody blamed Daria for the incident. Even James. It was too eye-opening. The girl's total irresponsibility and sensuality. It was obvious that she had no remorse. She didn't care that she trampled on a man's heart. She enjoyed a new romance with Kevin, showered her with signs of attention, and very expensive. He would order an exclusive bouquet of tulips in the fall. He would take her to a boutique with fresh, fashionable collections, and buy of almost all the best restaurants and cool parties. It seemed like the whole world of lucky feet. Looking at this, James began to wonder if his chosen one was so good. Like all lovers, he tried to think of some excuse for her behavior. But it was no good. No matter how he looked at it, Daria had done a terrible thing. The young man decided to give himself time to think. He distanced himself from the girl, ignored her at the university, didn't call her anymore, and wasn't interested in her affairs. However, Daria, to all appearances, did not even notice the disappearance of her faithful knight. Kevin was too much in her head. She woke up and went to sleep with thoughts of him, and she knew nothing about him. Where did he get the money for entertainment and luxurious gifts? It's unclear. Officially, he did not work anywhere from questions on this topic increased. His parents owned a real estate agency and earned very well. But it was unlikely that they allocated their son money for expensive gifts to girls. It was all a bit suspicious. But Daria chased the bad thoughts away. There is money. There is attention. There is, and there is. I have enough. The girl calmed herself. Up to the time and the truth, everything was fine. But how long the rope does not twist. The end of the easy dacha life came a month later. James, that's too bad. Why? Did Daria read everything into the tube? Sobbing, I feel so bad. James was taken aback by such affectionate treatment. Daria had never called him that, nor was she generally prone to sentimentality and tender words. But the surprise was quickly replaced by anxiety without the girl's coherent speech mixed with sobs. She couldn't really explain what had happened. And it was 3:00 p.m. on the clock. At such a time, one does not call just to chat. The conversation obviously didn't wait till morning. Daria, what's wrong? Where are you? To get the young man clear answers. But the girl only giggled and mumbled something unintelligible. Looks like she was drunk. I'll be right there. I hope your home will open the door. Resolutely said the young man, deciding that it would be faster on the spot to understand the situation. Under the door of Sergei did not have to stand. It was open. The apartment was silent, half-darkness reigned. In the room burned candles on the server for 2 tables. A ray of light came only from the bathroom. That's where the young man went and found Daria. She was sitting on the floor, eyes closed with her back against the washing machine, helplessly spreading her arms where blood was running down them. Nearby lay a pair of monetary scissors, a knife and blades from an antique razor, which is rarely used nowadays. And all of it was covered in blood, too. Daria, Daria, the guy started pounding on the girl. She didn't respond. Her head slumped to the side. Her body slid further and further to the floor. James felt a pulse on her bloody wrists. Alive, he exhaled. You fool. What have you done? Hello, good evening. Please send an ambulance to Boulevard. The bronze gogol on the boulevard was a silent witness to the unconscious Daria, being transferred from the stretcher to the ambulance. And he didn't care what was going on. How many situations like this has he seen in 70 years? What's it worth? Ages have changed. People lived their joys and sorrows, and he watched everything indifferently. For some reason, such strange thoughts crossed James' mind. Exhausted by the night's events, he was sleepy and out of it. The monument stood at the very end of the boulevard and had its back turned to him. Apparently, that is why it seemed to the young man that Gogol indifferently turned his back on the events of the patriarchal young man to the depths of his soul. Daria was under the control of doctors for a month and a half. First, she lay in the emergency hospital, then she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. What they do to anyone who tries to commit suicide. That's where she spent Christmas. That's something you don't forget. A holiday in the asylum, Daria joked in a phone conversation with James. By then, she had found the strength to smile again. The festive decorations in the psychoneurological dispensary, strangely enough, really created a joyful mood. Her streets were not put up so as not to provoke patients to their unconventional uses for the same reasons. Balls were hung from the ceiling, and just in case, not glass, but plastic. The gurneys standing along the corridor walls in the ward were especially adorable. All of them were lovingly and carefully paper-rained with bright colors. Daria would take pictures of all this on her phone and send them to James. Every day now passed in such telephone communication. Visitors were not allowed into the hospital. There was a quarantine, so calls and emails were the only connection to the normal world. Daria kept in contact only with James, as if shutting herself off from her former life, friends, and acquaintances. In the morning, she sent him a picture of the hospital breakfast. In the afternoon, she photographed the view outside the window of her pills. Actually, all that seemed significant to her in the dull hospital life, in the fact that James instantly responded to her most silly and unimportant messages, she found comfort. After all, that was how someone needed her, but at least someone. Daria never told James anything about what had happened that terrible evening when he had found her bloodied until she was discharged. He didn't ask either, afraid of triggering bad memories and bringing Daria out of her current state of not-so-stable condition. Despite the girl's seemingly good mood, the girl talked to herself. On the day she was discharged from the hospital, it turned out that there was no one to pick her up. All the girlfriends were busy, and Daria had no relatives in the city. Her parents lived in Colorado. To the rescue, as always, came loyal James, helped to load things into a cab, went with her, brought everything to the girl's home. Let me go to the store. You got a lot of stuff in here? The young man looked in the refrigerator, while Daria was sorting out the hospital bags. Why don't we buy some wine? Celebrate you coming home. Thank you, James. That was a big help. I don't feel strong enough. I can't see straight. The doctor said my ferrium is low. So there's no iron stores in my body. Well, you'd think I'd lose that much. Why don't you buy some buckwheat and something else? Something with lots of iron. Oh, that legend about buckwheat, laughed the young man. You should fry it with salt. There's a lot of iron in that. And most of all in kuna creepy and seaweed. Let's look it up on the internet. I'm sure we can find some exotic salad recipe. I mean, it's got seafood and it's fun to make. It'll be good for you. I'll buy some white wine for the seafood. No wine, said Daria. I can't. And I agree about the salad. Go to the store. I'll look up the recipe and send you a list. What should I get? It was James and Daria's long married day, discussing the menu, going to the store, cooking together, and actually having lunch or dinner. It was early at 5 p.m., right on the hospital schedule. Daria laughed as she smoked dishes. Quiet time, except I missed dinner. We had it from 3 to 5 p.m. at the hospital. I'm surprised I didn't take a picture of the food for you. I've developed a reflex to send you reports. Thank you again for your support and attention, and to the world of technological advancement. Without my phone, I'd be crazy out there. Although I'm already a little bit off, aren't I? Once I got there, Doria was embarrassed, the smile fading from her face. I'll always help you, James said, very seriously, and looked into the girl's eyes. Doria answered him with a long, attentive look, as if he was weighing something in his mind. Let's talk, she said. I want you to know the truth. That evening, she waited for Kevin to visit, though she thought it was strange to call him a guest. Rather, one might almost consider him a husband. They hadn't been apart since they'd met. That was what they were going to celebrate tonight. 2 months since the meeting in the nightclub, Daria had a surprise for the young man. The girl, anticipating how he would react to it, smiled dreamily and leisurely with love and care, gathered festive dishes on the table, arranged the utensils, put candles to create a cozy, intimate atmosphere. Kevin came with a large bouquet of scarlet roses, so long that there was no vase for them, and had to put them in a tall mop bucket. It looked like a garbage can, but the guys decided not to pay attention to it. In the candlelight, the roses in the bucket on the floor looked beautiful and a little mysterious, casting wavering shadows on the floor and the wall. Honey, Daria said, raising her glass of juice from the champagne Kevin had carried over. She declined. I'm so happy to be near you. I hope you are too. I'm glad I wasn't too lazy to go to the club then. But who knew I'd meet my destiny? Kevin smiled, and I'm happy as a kitten too. He raised his champagne glass too. Daria, he clinked it and guzzled the drink. And I have news for you, the man of my dreams. Laughing, Daria continued. We are going to have a baby boy or a baby girl. I'm pregnant. Kevin shuddered and widened his eyes, and there was an awkward pause. Daria sensed that something was wrong and looked at him puzzled. What, kids? What are you, stupid, retarded? How did you get knocked up? You were on the pill, weren't you? Lying? Kevin bellowed. Daria had never heard such harsh words from him, much less his own. And the abrupt transition from loving to fatal to boorish and shouting simply rendered her speechless. She hadn't expected such a reaction. Yeah, maybe it was a little early. You got kids. But I thought we'd be together for life. It doesn't matter if we have babies sooner or later. And there could be health problems later on. So it's a good thing I got pregnant. Daria spoke slowly, uncertainly, as if justifying herself, feeling that her words were useless, going upward, going nowhere without a reaction. Terror began to overwhelm her. Caught up in a wave, as if she was slowly but inevitably being submerged in icy water. When the cold reached her throat, Daria felt like she couldn't breathe. She opened her mouth, gasping for air. Look, what's the one for life? How old are you? 20? I'm 22. You really think you can find a lifelong mate at that age, and that you should be looking for a mate right now? Yeah, I didn't even think about it until I was 30. I want to live for myself to the fullest, enjoy my youth. And you're talking about a woman with a kid. Kevin laughed. It sounded and looked so unreal that Daria couldn't say a word. So I went if I thought I'd give you money for an abortion. You miscalculated. I'm not going to sponsor your mistakes. But I don't care if you accidentally or on purpose. You're the one who's stupid. You're the one who has to deal with it. Agreements. The guy jumped up, grabbed his coat, slipped his feet into his shoes, and without even buttoning up left, slamming the door. She bounced off the jamb without closing, but she didn't even notice it. She was in such shock at what had happened that it was as if her head had gone blank. There was not a single thought. It was as if the girl had fallen into a daze at this development, as if she didn't move and think, nothing would seem to have happened. Everything was resolved. It's like children hiding under the covers at night, from the monster living under the bed. If you get a good tangle, they won't get you. So frozen. Daria sat there for about half an hour, and then a glimpse of her, to focus on the frost, on the splendor standing in the trash, similarly trashed, turned out to be her whole beautiful, luxurious life as well, just like these flowers. Daria rose in a volley, drank a glass of wine, and went to the bathroom. The rest of the events unfolded in front of you, emphasized dryly. Daria finished the story. "And what about the baby?" quietly said James. "Soon the first ultrasound. She's been out for 3 months now." Daria's eyes took that gentle and a little embarrassed expression, which is familiar to all pregnant women. 2 weeks later, James and Daria were leaving the registry office. Both husband and wife, unlike most newlyweds, did not have a naive happiness surrounded by a crowd of friends and relatives. It was a very calm couple, looking like people who have done a very important thing. Communicating home, a little rest from the troubles. Accompanying the guys were only their witnesses. During the registration of the marriage, classmate Tony and James, Jenna's mom, they were told to take a witness and a relative, and a single one at that. Plus an age is bad luck, but the young people dismissed it as bad luck. They just wanted to get registered and get on with their lives. Parents couldn't even come, said they were busy at work. What surprised James and his mom? It's a big event in their lives. It's not every day a daughter gets married. The wedding reception was modest. They had a meal at Jenna's house, and the meal was like a holiday meal. There was a liver, herring under a fur coat, cake according to the recipe. I mean, everything that a woman of no age would associate with a holiday. "Do not regret that called in the wife?" Daria asked a little flirtatiously. "Not yet," James laughed. "I'll do anything to make you happy." "Thank you." The girl burst into tears. "I'll remember that promise," James smiled. His decision to get married was lightning fast. That same evening, when Daria told him why she had tried to kill herself, he saw that she needed support, care, all of which he could give his beloved. James realized that Daria's feelings for him were not the same as his feelings for her. On her part, it was gratitude and respect, but maybe love would come with time. The boy hoped. Daria realized that at that moment, she didn't have a shoulder to lean on James. Her parents took little interest in her life, but promised to help her with the baby. To do so, however, would have required coming home to Colorado. She would have to leave her prestigious university and take a sabbatical. Daria wanted to continue her studies because, fortunately, she was not asked to leave the university. There was a time when lying in a psychiatric hospital was given a wolf ticket, and people were kicked out of school and work. Now there were only restrictions on the ability to occupy certain positions, for example, in law enforcement agencies. But the girl was definitely not going there, but working. Journalist was free to be a journalist. In the Institute, this situation was treated calmly with a message. Who does not happen to whom? Classmates, however, a little teased her. If there was a dispute with Daria, they laughed, saying, "You're crazy. You're not worth getting involved with." But it was good-natured, friendly teasing, nothing more. No one was shying away from the girl and did not label her. In addition to her studies, Daria, of course, was also attracted by the life in the capital. She wanted to stay in the city, but not for entertainment and stormy life, but because the big city gave great opportunities for the development of the child. Like all women, Daria, while still pregnant, realized all the maternal mission. Her worldview changed significantly. And not yet born baby, she already thought more than about herself, a good addition to the maternity capital. She used to joke about James when talking to her girlfriends. A reliable father, even though he's not her own. It's like an important starting point for a child's future. He's not your equal, it's who you are, Daria said. Miranda, that ugly Institute loser girlfriend. Girls kept in touch after graduation, though it was hard to call them close friends. How to call each other, discuss common acquaintances. Yeah, but he's your equal. She's been looking at him for a while. Daria really didn't like James very much. She thought she was a gray mouse. Best thing for him was an undistinguished student. All through university, she tried to get close to him, but he was impossible to understand. For James, there was only one girl, Daria. It was on her that his loving gaze was always turned. Others he did not notice. The little family of James and Daria suddenly turned out to be quite happy. In July, their baby doll was born. Their favorite little girl, Kelly. And the whole world began to revolve around her. Everyone was crazy about the baby. Daria was always with her, reacting to the slightest infusions so far. Meticulously selected foods that could be included in the baby's diet. read everything she saw on the internet about parenting. In other words, became a regular mom, attentive and caring, and seemed to find pleasure in it. James helped bathe the baby and reclaimed his sole right to walks, insisting that it was his and his daughter's private time. James' mom, though not his own grandmother, the girl took as her own, literally blowing dust from her granddaughter the word no. The little girl did not hear from her. For this, the guys even gave the woman a little bit of credit. Mole from pampering a child can be a couple of months old. So in pleasant troubles, the life flowed in its turn. 3 years passed. In August, a very important event happened in the family. Kelly went to kindergarten for the first time. The housemates judged for a long time, gave birth, when to give the little girl there. On the one hand, it seems to be exactly at the age of 3 that is not advised. At this time, children's first age crisis may have problems with behavior and adaptation to a new place peers educators. On the other hand, there was no point in taking the child to daycare before Kelly, and there was always someone there. There was no lack of care and attention. On the third hand, everyone thought that kindergarten is still needed for the development of the girl to learn to join the team, to find a common language with other people, to get used to the rules. In the end, we decided and took her to the first day only for 2 hours. On the advice of educators, because this way children get used to it easier. For such a short period of time, kids do not get tired. Their attention is kept on new impressions, and they do not have time to get very bored at home. At home, however, everyone was very bored and worried. How could it be? Did the baby spend the whole day with strangers? Kelly with the whole family. James took the day off on purpose. For a year after university, he worked at a radio station as a news anchor. It was a floating schedule, and weekends weren't always Saturday and Sunday, but he could get a day or two off in the middle of the week. Daria hadn't gone to work yet. She was a homemaker. James, the mother, was retired and today specially came to the children on the outskirts of the city to meet the girl after the exciting event. Sunny, how was your first day? I liked the kindergarten as a teacher is good, and the children made friends, asked the girl homemade. Kelly smiled funny, babbled in response, telling about her impressions. She liked everything. There was almost no boredom. She wanted to go home, but the daycare wasn't bad either. I also have good news, Daria suddenly said, as if in between I'm going to work, and Kelly got worried. Jenna, who's going to take care of it? I'll always help, but I can't live with you all the time, and driving back and forth every day isn't an option either. It's a 2-hour drive from downtown to your place. It's going to be hard. Maybe not in a hurry, while you're off work. Don't worry, she's in kindergarten now, answered Daria. And it's not like I'm going to work tomorrow. I'll wait for Kelly to adjust. A couple weeks, and it's not a full-time job. So far, they've offered 12 hours, 3 or 4 hours off. It's an online shopping fashion magazine. It's nothing complicated or serious. I'll be able to write articles from home if I need to. He'll be fine. I'll be fine, Daria assured me. At least I'll get some brain work done. It's not all cooking and cleaning for me. In fact, Daria had been looking for an excuse to get away from home for a long time. For several years, the girl was bored with the daily chores about the child. And as soon as they became less, as the girl grew up, began to look for ways to change the environment. In recent months, she actively corresponded in Instagram, restored contacts with friends, which had gone to the background after the birth of the ring, willingly responded to requests for correspondence from strangers. She had several regular admirers. They did not cross the line of propriety, and her marital status knew, but regularly offered to meet allegedly only as friends. Daria had to refuse as there was no reason to leave the house for a long time. She only went out for half an hour to the store or to the clinic. That's when Kelly was looking at Jenna. You can't get to a meeting in that amount of time. And if Daria had gone any longer, it might have made her mother-in-law suspicious. And then she got a lucky break, a part-time job offer from a classmate, Tony, who suddenly turned from a gray mouse into a fashion expert and started her own blog, which gained 500,000 subscribers. She was offered all new joint projects in this field. In addition, she worked as a shopping assistant for rich ladies, so she urgently needed an assistant. And Daria on this post was very suitable as a noble party girl. In the past, knew all the best places of the city with your communication skills. You quickly resumed your former ties, Miranda Darius said confidently. That one was just. You need to get out of the house under a plausible excuse to spend time in the company of successful, beautiful people, not shop moms on the playground. Well, and get acquainted in real life with all her internet fans, flirt, raise her self-esteem. Remember that she is a young woman and not an addition to the child. To change her surroundings and diversify her life, Daria succeeded after 3 weeks. By then, Kelly was happily going to daycare herself. She spent the day there calmly. And in the evening, she would go to bed when she had had her fill of impressions. That's why Daria could go to work with peace of mind. And on that long-awaited day, when she finally arrived at the office, who are they? She felt like a young, fun, even a little carefree woman again. Work had taken her over. Meetings, conversations, and articles. The variety of life and activities pulled Daria into its cycle. More and more often she began to stay late on business, spending not a few hours, as planned, but a full 8-hour working day or even more. There were several reasons for this, and the loads were more than promised. And being honest with herself, the girl realized that in principle she was not eager to go home to her husband's company. She valued James as an attentive husband and caring father, but she was frankly bored with him. His leisure after work was reduced to discussing household chores, shopping, watching movies on his laptop. Daria was ready to shrug off the predictability of life. She wanted more movement, more events, not such a gray existence. But sitting at home would not find adventures. The chances for them became much greater. As soon as the girl broke out of the 4 walls. What does that mean? Tensely asked James, holding out Daria. Her cell phone. It was late evening. The girl had just come out of the bath, for a good hour. Relaxed lying in the fragrant bubble bath. She purposely did not take her phone with her, so that nothing would distract her from relaxation. And for nothing you pop up with a notification. Displayed first an obviously off-topic message from one Arthur. Missed you. What time tomorrow? Daria took the phone from her husband's hands and waved the notification with an indifferent look. And this is Arthur from the cafe. What cafe and why is he writing to you in the evening and in such a tone? Before the cafe, we have a boy barista, works there on the first floor of our office building. He makes coffee for me all the time. We chat with him. Why did you give him your number? James continued to find the situation strange. And he once asked me for my dentist's number. He wanted to go to a proven specialist, to be treated. But I sent it to him. Now he writes to me sometimes as a joke. Don't worry, we're just friends. He's younger than us. We're 24 and he's 19. He's like a brother to me, like so young and inexperienced. All right, James said. Ask him not to write so late. The great Kelly heard. She woke up. She's tossing and turning. That's good. Of course, I won't answer him now. I'll run to the cafe tomorrow morning. And I'll remind him that it's indecent for married ladies to write at such a time. Daria giggled. He got away with it. You should be more careful. She exhaled as James went into the other room to see his daughter. The second bell rang a month later in early December. This time, James stopped by Daria's office unexpectedly. He needed to pick up a prescription for Kelly. The girl had a bad cold, and the doctor had prescribed antibiotics. Daria did not have time to buy the medicine before work. So James decided not to wait for the evening, but to drop in on his wife and make a quick run to the drugstore. It was obvious that Daria was confused when she saw him. The guy didn't understand why at first, but then he noticed a luxurious bouquet of scarlet roses on her desk next to her laptop. Some vague memory flashed through his mind. Like he'd seen a similar bouquet somewhere. Who's giving you flowers? I'll be jealous, rather jokingly, pronounced James, warding off bad thoughts and suspicions. The customers are grateful. Daria blurted out a little too quickly. They thank me with roses. What did you do? Why are the gifts so expensive? I wrote a good article about a restaurant. It opened recently. They need publicity. It's really not a bad place. I wrote my impressions, and the owner came and gave me flowers. And here's one more for Kelly. Daria took a velvet box out of the desk drawer and handed it to her husband. He opened it, and there were tiny gold earrings. He was the one who found out I had a daughter and decided to give her a present. What a gift. Give the earrings back. They're too expensive. It's inappropriate to take something like that, James said firmly. Come on, it's time to get her ears pierced anyway. I was thinking of going out to buy her earrings. Daria was stubborn about the gift. I'm against it, said James, and let's not waste any more time arguing. I'm going to get the medicine. He took the prescription and left. God loves a trinity. As they say, the third incident left James in no doubt that his wife was cheating on him. Caught her at home. It was like the beginning of a classic anecdote. The husband came home from work early, and the wife with her lover in the marital room. But reality, it turns out, is not funny at all, but harsh, roughly breaking her life into before and after. Especially, it was not just a lover, it was Kevin, the very same guy Daria dated 4 years ago. The ring girl's own father wasn't home from kindergarten yet. She had to be picked up in a couple hours, which was obviously what Daria had taken advantage of. Kevin, seeing James silently, quickly got dressed and ran away. As indeed, he always disappeared in difficult situations. James began snidely as the door closed behind Kevin. What are you going to lie to me now? He turned to Daria, a friend of a fellow barista. I was imagining things. The young man's voice was disintegrating with deep resentment. I have nothing to say to you, James. Daria said dryly. I'm not going to make excuses for you. I cheated. I don't love you. I don't regret getting married. To Kelly, you're the perfect father, but you're hard for me to live with. There's no spark, there's no flight. It's just a lot of stuff. What do you expect? You want some crazy, out-of-this-world action. We're on a different level. We're families with kids, not fiancés. You don't want a cozy home. You want flames blazing uncontrollably on the loose. And it's all on a wishy-washy basis in the end. Taking care of your family and raising your daughter is boring to you. James genuinely didn't understand what Daria was missing. Yes, I am bored, Daria said. What to say to that? James didn't know. He was not inclined to empty scandals. Therefore, even before the return of his daughter from kindergarten, he packed a minimum of things and went to live with a friend from work. Knew that Sasha will not ask unnecessary questions and climb into his soul. And so it turned out. The friend led him into the hall without too many questions and told him that he could stay as long as he needed. James was at a complete loss and could not yet guess what he would do next. How to live without his daughter, without his family, and even without his home. The apartment in which he lived with Daria and the nickname belonged to him was inherited from his grandparents. What to do now on the street child cannot throw out. Twirled in the head of the guy confused and thoughts. It is necessary then to divide the apartment. But what is there to divide? They won't give much for a flat shack. He never came to a decision. A couple of weeks later, Daria called and suggested we talk at their place. In the evening after work, the conversation got tough. Where did Kevin come from now? The first thing James asked from the detention center. You wouldn't believe it, Daria sighed. When he broke up with me, or rather when he dumped you, James didn't fail to remind me. Well, okay, he dumped me. He went on a bender. He said he was good with money. He fought with the clubs and got caught with some kind of drugs. And not by accident, but on a tip-off, one of his buddies got on the hook with the cops and blabbed to the cops that Kevin was involved with drug dealers. But you know, when they're on the internet and they're hiding drugs in different places, like to keep themselves safe and not have to meet the buyers in person and not have to hand anything over. Kevin, according to his comrade, organized the whole thing and was the ringleader. He had access to suppliers, and the network of invaders was controlled by him. That's where he got the big money from. I wondered how he got so much. He was reluctant to talk about it, so I didn't ask. So they put him in jail as an organizer. He spent almost 4 months in a pre-trial detention center. They did a lot of digging, but somehow they didn't find anything on him, he said. There was no trial, he was just released. Although I think it was his rich parents who gave him the money. He, however, flatly denies that he is connected with drugs, claims that he was insulted. But there's no smoke without fire. Why did you get involved with him again? James asked in bewilderment. I don't know, something came up. My dad's rings. Come on, he hadn't wanted to know her for years. He hadn't wanted her to come into the world in the first place, to put it mildly. Now all of a sudden he needs you and his daughter. At least you didn't take her to him. A piercing hunch. James jumped up from the couch where they were sitting. Daria was silent, lowering her eyes. I'm not giving up my daughter, the boy said shortly and stiffly. He had seen her once, Daria admitted. He didn't ask me to. I decided to show him from afar. From the playground did not introduce her, coined and words Daria. He looked, said she didn't look like him, but she was pretty. That was the end of it. He had no interest in the child. Well, I didn't insist, and that's good. No need to confuse the baby with an obscure daddy number 2. She's got one father. Muffled, James said. He rested his elbows on his knees and hid his face in his palms, trying to hide the feelings that overwhelmed him. I agree, Daria said. Wait, he gave me the earrings. I gave them back after he didn't want to talk to her. I realized I didn't want them as a reminder. His indifference was a gift. It was like a payoff. Why sleep with him? She accepted the bouquets. I finally realized about those roses on your desk. I wondered where I'd seen them. Yeah, I saw them the night I pulled you out of the bathroom bloody too. Kevin, your man who likes to give expensive roses to women he's about to dump. It's a tradition. I'm being sarcastic. James, I don't know why I slept. Memories came flooding back. How fun it was. How easy life was. How he wooed you beautifully. How he made you a baby and dumped you. James picked up. What did you pay? And what really hurts your eyes? I don't think it's unreasonable to remind you of that. Because you do not appreciate what you have, and you valued the past and bad. That was the end of it. I don't know what to think or what to do. I'm going out for Christmas. Nevertheless, they were welcoming their parents together. Of course, Daria knew how, put this thought into James, ready to do anything for his daughter. He hadn't forgiven his wife, but he decided that for his baby girl's sake, he would try to portray a happy person for the duration of the holiday. He felt that he still loved Daria. Her love was incomprehensible to himself. It had nowhere to come from. After all, Daria all these years did not sign it in any way, did not try to please her husband, to do something good. He understood that she married him impulsively, not planning a lifelong marriage. It was just more convenient for her at the time. A nice guy came along, so she had to take advantage. And so far, she hadn't felt any reciprocal feelings. James realized, but just habitually accepted all the benefits her spouse gave her. The young man understood all that. But he didn't want to break up his family, even if it wasn't a happy one. They say that the way you celebrate Christmas is the way you spend it. James and Daria confirmed the saying. They stayed together. A few months later, the routine dulled the pain of the affair. Daria cut back her hours and was home by lunchtime. James at the radio station could take different shifts morning, afternoon, or evening. And he tried to go to work in the afternoon so he could spend less time with Daria. But he had time to be with his daughter in the morning before daycare and in the evening after. In April, he decided to take a vacation for a couple of weeks to go to the doctors and find out why she was so often sick. Over the winter, the little girl just squirmed all the time. Sat at home for a couple days, then went out to daycare and got sick again. Doctors did not find anything serious. Came to the conclusion that the immune system is a little weakened. They recommended recreational gymnastics, more vitamins, and fresh air. With the latter, James decided some need to take the daughter to the country house. Yes, the weather for a vacation in nature was still not particularly suitable. While it was more slushy right from those days, only sometimes came out the sun and felt the breath of spring. But in favor of the country house was the fact that it was surrounded by forest, mostly warrior, in which it is useful to walk and breathe a girl, even if it wasn't going to be a long walk, lest she catch a cold. And the house had a stove, so they would not freeze. All these arguments the guy outlined to his wife, calling her to go with them. After all, Daria often finished the work from home, something to finish writing and negotiated an interview. So could and now dial material for articles and work remotely, while being with his daughter in nature. And with him, too. James, in his heart, still hoped to strengthen the hard-won relationship, and a change of scenery could help. But Daria refused, citing the fact that she and her friend and boss Miranda had been invited to a seminar. There was a big fashion party going on. "I can't miss it," Daria said irritably. All the fashion designers, models, journalists, and owners of fashion publications would be there. So many useful, important people in one place. So many acquaintances you can make contacts for the future. But what's the point of me spending half a week with you at the dacha when I've got months of work ahead of me, but we can go a little earlier or later? What do you say? Are we afraid of being under you? No, Daria balked. We don't know how things will go. Maybe we'll have to stick around and do some interviews for the future. I'm telling you a month in advance. I can stock up on materials. That's why I'll try to arrange a conversation on the spot and forge iron while the iron is hot. And a fresh head before the seminar will come in handy. Without the hassle of everyday life, prepare. It is necessary to study the accounts in social networks of all these important people who will be there to know from which side to enter, where to enter the bedroom. James couldn't help himself. It was starting to look suspicious to him because it looked like an excuse. God, how long are you going to keep reminding me of this? Daria's on a roll. Yes, it had been one time in more ways than one, James said quietly. And that's it. Do whatever you want. I have to work. Daria defiantly grabbed her laptop and opened Instagram. Purely work-related, she said, intercepting James's tense gaze. All these fashionable fellows are on the internet in droves. They're posting fresh, glamorous pictures. I've got to see what everyone's up to. I'm busy. The next day, James rode the electric train and had a fun and useful time. In the usual road fun, with children counted how many red cars were seen standing at the crossings, and how many white ones learned the names of trees flashing in their ears outside the windows. The ride was about 40 minutes and another half an hour to walk along the path past the village of an abandoned pioneer camp, and then through the forest. By the end of the trip, Dad and daughter were very tired, and their feet were a little wet. In the forest, glades served themselves here and there. When they reached the country house, a small two-roomed house with a veranda, they first of all heated the stove. After cooking a rudimentary dinner as a dessert, they solemnly opened a jar with royal gooseberry jam, which in the summer was rolled by James' mother, and ate it without any radio point saucer by scooping pieces of loaf directly from the jar. This little hooliganism amused Kelly very much. Then it got warmer, and James carried the girl to bed. In the morning, he worried whether the temperature of the little girl will not rise after yesterday's hike through the still gray woods. But all was well. Kelly counted cheerfully, demanded jam instead of breakfast, and laughed gleefully. That's how a few days flew by. There were still 2 more weekends left before the end of the serious vacation. He called Daria, decided that he would go home. On Sunday evening, they would spend an extra day in nature. True, there was a small problem stove for the day Mila. On the second evening, and city dweller James did not know how to approach it, what exactly to fix in it. From sin, he stopped stoking and turned on electric heaters. They were enough for a small country house. The heat was kept until morning, and during the day they did without them, as it was already considerably warmer outside. So on Saturday morning, she and the girl decided to have a last youth day, as they called it among themselves after a late breakfast of idleness. They lay on the bed, read books, watched cartoons from the phone. That from watching videos in the middle of the day almost sat down. So honey, the phone needs to eat. Let's go feed it with electricity, James joked. You and I will go for a walk, and then we'll have lunch too, we agreed. We'll go to the field and listen to the birds. In the woods, they could already hear the spring song of birds and ringers. I like this joyful polyphony very much. James stuck the sticker into the socket, but the charging indicator did not move. Already the cord in the phone corrected and in the sockets moved. No luck. The power must have gone out, the guy guessed. He flicked the switch, and sure enough, the lights didn't come on either. Nothing changed. And an hour later, when they returned from their walk, James went to the neighbors to ask if this happens often and for how long. Oh, it's their weekend tradition. A neighbor waved his hand at the power company. It's even strange. Many people go to the country house just for the weekend, and they don't turn off the lights, and they don't turn them on until Monday. We tried to find out what it's connected with. What's the problem with the lights going out every week? We didn't get anything. They have an accident, you see, regular, like clockwork on Saturday night or morning. Well, I guess we'll have to go into town early, James said sadly. We thought we'd stay until tomorrow, but Kelly's been sick a lot. In the winter, don't want to freeze her out. Even though the nights aren't too cold, but why risk it? And my cell phone's dying. I don't want to be out of touch in the country with the baby. I don't know if they packed up and made it to the station before dark. Then the train came. In an hour and a half, they were already approaching their house. Stopped by on the way to the mini store to buy tea buns. April is a treacherous time. By the evening, I started to live under morals, and I really wanted to come home faster and warm myself with a hot drink with anger. Kelly solemnly carried a bag with scones. When they finally entered the apartment, they saw that everywhere the light was on, and for some reason it was very quiet. "Daria," James called out. "We arrived a little early at the cottage. The lights are gone." They say they've decided it's better to go home for a long time, because with these weather forecasts, it's not clear whether it's going to be cold or bearable. James said all this, peering into the rooms, expecting to see Daria, but there was no reaction to his words, and neither was Daria. Not in the hall, not in the bedroom. James reached the kitchen and went numb. He was having déjà vu. There was Daria sitting on the floor, covered in blood. James instinctively took a step forward towards her and saw that the blood was not hers halfway around the corner. There was a man lying under the table. Around his head was a large, almost writhe, a dark crimson puddle. Daria was alive and seemingly unharmed. She sat by the radiator, hugging her knees, as if cuddled, warm in the chill and weather, and staring at one point on her toe, as if she saw something very important there. Sometimes she ran very slowly. Daria once again for some reason called her James. "Mommy." A cheerful voice came from behind her, and Kelly tried to squeeze into the kitchen. Daddy was frozen in the narrow doorway. "Kelly," James' sunshine caught up. "Let's go in the hall. You can watch a cartoon." "Daddy." "What about tea?" The little girl held out the scones. "Now, darling, wait. I'll get you everything." James, what seemed odd about the situation, took the little girl to the room, gave her a tablet, went to the kitchen, turned on the kettle. After that, I called Jenna. "Mom, urgently come and get the ring." "Mom, it's urgent." "I'll explain everything later." "Take a cab." That's when his phone went dead. James continued to act mechanically. He made tea, took the rings, closed the door to the hall, then went into the kitchen and shook Daria by the shoulders. She didn't react. He bent down and checked the pulse on the man's neck. It was obvious he was dead, though. The guy saw a dent in the kitchen countertop, lowered his eyes, and noticed that there was a meat cleaver lying on the floor just under the cabinet. The kind with a blade on one side and a bare hammer on the other. The hatchet was covered in blood. Dark hair stuck to it, exactly like the hair on the man's head. James automatically pulled the hatchet out from under the nightstand, twirled it in his hands, and placed it on top of the cutlery vane. "Daria, I'm calling the police," he said. The girl was still staring blankly at her feet. James picked up her cell phone and dialed 911. The police arrived almost at the same time as Jenna, and at first, they did not even want to let the elderly woman in, thinking that they could use her as a witness. But when they got to the bottom of it, they came to their senses and allowed the child to be taken away. That was the last time James saw Kelly over the shoulder of his mother, carrying the little girl out of the house in her arms. The baby girl had her arms around her neck and her legs around her waist. James noticed that she was wearing a jacket but no shoes. Her grandmother was in such a hurry to get her out of the scary place that she didn't put shoes on the little girl, but took them with her and held them in her hand. The little girl looked at her father with tear-stained eyes. James remembered that look for the rest of his life. Jenna and the baby got into the elevator and drove away. The guy went back to the apartment, and on the threshold he heard the killer screaming. "What have you done? How could you?" shouted Daria. The policeman looked at her in surprise, not realizing who she was addressing. Daria jumped up, staring at James with crazy eyes, and said, pointing her finger at him, "Take him away, or I'm afraid he'll kill me too." "What are you talking about?" stunned James. "She's the one who killed the man." He turned to the policeman. "Me and my daughter, we come from the country house, and here we are." "Probably her next one in the sense of another one," one of the policemen interrogated. "But she had already had lovers and brought them home. I caught her with one of them. That one ran away as soon as he saw me, but this one didn't have time, did he?" I could see that the policeman was tense. He looked at James not with a sympathetic look, but with suspicion. "But what are you doing?" "I told you I was at the cottage with my daughter. We had just arrived, and we weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow. She was probably taking advantage of the opportunity to have fun. All right, our case is small. We're patrolmen. The investigators will be here to take care of it. I'm going to ask you two to come with us." James and Daria have been taken to the detention center. They were officially detained for 48 hours for trial. Daria was released after 24 hours. James, on the other hand, went to the detention center. His status changed from suspect to defendant. How did that happen? James then tried to understand for years. At the detention center, Michael's lawyer came to see him. The kid introduced himself dignifiedly. About James' young age, no more than 25 years old by the look of him. "I've been approached by Jenna, your mother. I'll represent you in court." "Why in court?" James asked. "It's not my fault. Came home wife and lover." "Exactly," picked up the lawyer. "I understand you as a man. It's come to my attention that your wife is a whore. That's putting it mildly. I understand if you got angry or if you were hit. The investigators documented it once, that it was only a single blow. It's understandable. There was no such thing. We got to the kitchen. There was a dead man lying there. I don't even know who it was. I don't even know his name. I mean, his name at least. Daniel, his name was Daniel Brunson, lived in New York, modeling for fashion shows. Oh my God. Is that why she was so eager to go to New York? She said she was there for work, but she was actually taking her lover there. What an asshole, James swore in his heart. You should be careful with expressions, reacted the lawyer, or you may be accused of attempted murder of his wife, that he never laid a finger on her, although perhaps she deserved it. It's a pity that did not leave her, as with a lover caught her daughter traumatized divorce did not want to, and her pity. I loved her. James, I highly recommend it. Plead guilty to murder by passion. That's 3 years. Section 7, 105 for murder, 6 years to life. It could also qualify as especially cruel. It's still an axe to the head. And there's motive, compounding the jealousy. So you could be looking at 10 or more. How could I be jealous if I saw this man for the first time in my life, and then after his death? It's ironic, isn't it? Bitter, James grinned. Your wife claims that you burst into the house, saw her with a man, began to argue, grabbed an axe, and threw yourself at the victim. The murder weapon has your prints all over the body. It's still undergoing forensics. The pathologists promised to report tomorrow, but they will probably find my marks on him, James said. I checked his pulse on a dead man without breathing. It's kind of mechanical. And the axe had prints on it because I picked it up off the floor. Seriously, you don't know you're not supposed to touch the weapon. Yeah, I didn't think anything of it. The corpse on the floor is even in a stupor. I wasn't thinking. Yeah, you finally realized it was a dead body, didn't you? What do you want from me, James? You're supposed to be defending me, and you're pressuring me to plead guilty. Because I see the futility of the case. Your wife is pointing at you. She denies her guilt. There's no evidence against her, but your fingerprints are on the axe, and her word against yours, and you have a clear motive. So for now, the odds are in her favor. Okay, even if we can prove she did it. She's got a dependent child. Don't you feel sorry for the little girl? You're gonna drag your wife through the courts. Who's the kid gonna be with? My mother. I've officially adopted the girl. My mother can look after her. What's she to the child? Foster grandmother. That's not a legal relationship, and you'll be deprived of your paternal rights. After everything that happened, and the girl will go to the orphanage. They won't give her to you, even if you stay on the outside. You're a foster father, and you're probably divorcing her mother." James was confused. He didn't know what to do. How a child would grow up without a mother. "Think about the matter until morning," the lawyer said. "Tomorrow, I need your decision before the 8 hours of detention expires." James spent the night in heavy deliberation to go free, to imprison Daria and send his daughter to an orphanage, or to go to jail himself and leave the child at least with his mother. "And when I get back, I'll deal with it then." "You should divorce Daria right away." "Absolutely." "No, I'd rather do it later. They won't let me date Kelly. Though why take the little girl to jail so she'll remember me behind bars?" James realized that his thoughts were leading to a definite decision. "I'm ready to plead guilty," he told his lawyer this morning. "Great," he seemed a little overjoyed. "I'm turning you over to another lawyer." "What's that for?" "I don't understand, James. It's for the best, believe me." "And Michael's gone." "All right." Chuckles. "What's an interesting name for a town? Is it all squatting or something?" "I'm sure I'll get there," James thought, sitting in the Zaki wagon. That's the name of the special wagon used to transport convicts to the place where they serve their sentences. The man was sentenced to 3 years in prison and sent to a colony in an old town well known. It's been around since the 16th century. Was tiny, but at once with 2 attractions, ancient monastery and a modern pulp and paper mill, the largest in the state. And it was built in the late 50s by convicts. For this purpose, a colony was organized there. Later, it was moved outside the city. James was given a brief historical tour by the escort who was traveling with him. They got off at a small station. There was a beautiful Karelian forest with famous birch trees and desolation all around. A broken road, heaps of garbage, near it and the railroad platform. Further transportation was to take place in a special truck, but they were sorry to drag a whole van for one prisoner and took him in an ordinary beanbag, but with 2 guards. One guard was additionally sent from the colony to meet the newcomer. It was about 15 kilometers from the station, so James had little time to admire the surroundings. Nevertheless, he was glad to have at least a little variety for his eyes. After the walls of the pretrial detention center, and the court walks in a tiny courtyard of the windows of the car with bars. And on arrival at the colony, he remembered the sky, trees, smells, sounds. While he was being inspected, processed, and read out the prison rules. "Evening in the hut," said James, finally entering the prison cell. "God, who teaches you that?" sighed the huge, shaven-headed man with wolves all over his body. You could see them clearly as he was standing there in just his pants and no shirt. He looked like a very old convict, so your bunk pointed to the bunk beds near the door. "Climb up there for now." "By the book," he explained, looking at the table and James. "The good seats are closer to the windows. But chicks like you don't deserve to occupy them right away. Then we'll see what kind of bird you are. Say thank you. At least we're not putting you at the door. That still counts for something." James shrugged his shoulders and walked to the designated place. He put the bag with his things on the bunk. He looked around a bit. The beds were headboards against the walls. There were 2 stools next to each of them. In the corner of the room, suddenly found personal lockers with clubs, reminiscent of storage lockers in the store, only wooden. Don't be fooled. A man intercepted his gaze. They steal from locked lockers. Don't leave important, expensive things there. By the way, Nick, I'm keeping an eye on you so you don't get into any trouble. Tell me how you got here. The men are going to start coming home from work now. Well, we've got about 20 more minutes. James started telling his story about the chief. Why'd you take the blame? You shouldn't have said anything. You incriminated yourself right off the bat. What kind of a strange lawyer did you have? Not happy, said James. The lawyer wasn't really my lawyer. How so? Nick was surprised. I found out from my new lawyer at the trial that he was a phony. He came to me, lied to me that he was from my mom. As it turned out, she'd never heard of him. After they took me away, she was very confused. Plus, she had her granddaughter on her. She didn't even think in the first few days that she should look for a defense attorney. He was hired by the lover of my ear and the father of my daughter, Kevin. Nick's eyes widened at this information. James explained all the previous vicissitudes of his family life and continued the story anyway. Kevin, this I don't know how Duria convinced him. Although I guess he paid for a lawyer to fool my head. What's more, Kevin came to my trial as a witness, testified that I was awful. Caught him in bed with his wife, and he allegedly barely got away from me. But he ran away so fast I didn't even have time to send him a message. Not to beat him up, but you can't prove anything. Duria was also a witness to those events, and in court she colorfully described how I threw myself at him. In general, I would say that it was as if it was all planned in advance to put me in jail. Except I killed a man to do it. Strange, but they didn't give me anything to prove my guilt. Even the fact that I called my mom first and then the police. They also stuck to the fact that they think I called my mom from my own phone. I was trying to cover up the call, but I called the police from the tower phone to prove that she was at the scene of the crime. That's bullshit. My phone was dead at the time. The first phone that came up wasn't my home phone, it was my cell phone. So I dialed the police from it. I see, Nick sighed. All right, the brother was settling in. By the way, don't be afraid of them. Our zone is considered red. In answer to James' mute question, he continued. That means that it's not the prisoners who rule here, but the prison authorities. And if the zone is black, then the prisoners set the rules, and the administration just looks after them. And here we have meetings, like you, according to the concepts, who haven't lived in the movies, but have only seen them. So it's calmer here, even though the regime is strict, since there are murderers in jail, but at least there are no thieves' laws or anything else. Don't mention the movie lingo. Laughing. Nick, for the last time. Okay, I'm going to take a shower, because I didn't get there after work. Don't worry, you'll get more or less used to it. It took James a few months. Almost a whole summer he spent in some kind of trance, not believing that it would last. Most of the day was taken up with work. Some of the prisoners labored on the processing tree, making logs for houses and baths. All sorts of carpentry, and little things like wooden spoons for kitchen shovels. And they did not work for the sake of appearances, but to order. And the colony was very proud of the fact that the prisoners earned about $2 a day. By the standards of the prison, it was considered very good. People like Nick, strong, healthy, hardy, were sent to the tree processing. In general, he was a trucker by profession, and it was kind of confusing. It so happened that an experienced driver hit a man on the highway, jumped out of nowhere. There weren't even bushes by the road to interfere with the view. It wasn't raining, nothing was light. The man just appeared and almost threw himself under the wheels, Nick assured me. They gave him 2 years for causing death by negligence, and the abundance of narcologists, slightly frightened to James, when we met explained that Nick's daughter was studying to be a tattoo master. One day I asked if I could practice on me. Smiling, Nick recalled, "Well, what am I what?" It is, of course, not that Shimi as a child felt tip marker to draw was, but almost on the head. To me, the sun said that it is a symbol of truth and light, and I am exactly what she said, honest and light. And so it went on. I became interested, went about the symbols of different reed. I asked her to do another tattoo myself, and you see the result. Another friend James had was the complete opposite of Nick. He was a flimsy programmer named Jack. He went to prison because he was careless. He lived with his old mom, worked remotely mostly at night. After all, it was a different time zone. Was making very good money and punching it in. It was a week under the belt, pumped out under an IV. Once he even ended up in a drug dispensary when the doctor on call refused to take him for a ride, saying that it was a serious matter. You could go to the afterlife. Had to call an ambulance. And after the hospital, he was put on the register. He gave up drinking, but he snapped. After another big project, he decided to celebrate his paycheck. His mom was sick by then. She was being cared for by a nurse. But during his binge, Jack forgot to call her. He went out for almost a week with drinking buddies. When he got home, his mom was dead. He was convicted of leaving a helpless person in danger and given a year in juvie. Jack's been quieter than the rest of the world. Worked on a farm that was set up in prison to make money for the delicatessen. No eggs or meat for the prisoners. Everything was for sale, but there was enough food for everyone. And it was mostly grown in the colony itself. There was a large subsidiary farm, a vegetable garden with potatoes, carrots, and other vegetables, greenhouses with tomatoes and cucumbers, and pigs, goats, rabbits. Jack was sent to take care of the birds, because it didn't require much physical strength. But James and Jack met not on the farm, but on television. Unbelievable. But the colony had its own cable TV studio. For James, as a journalist, it was a dream job, and the wardens were pleased. The prison was plagued by financial audits. The studio was not bringing in revenue and was always in danger of closing. And with the advent of the pros, there was hope for the development of television workers, as they were laughingly but respectfully called. There were 5 people working in the colony. They produced news for which they themselves filmed and edited stories about the colony, and inserted digests of international news. They also made useful programs, for example, about the rights of prisoners. What they are supposed to learn in the colony. What can they learn? Jack helped the studio with setting up equipment, not only computers, but also cameras and other things. We decided that if he knew about computers, he could handle all the other equipment. That's pretty much how it worked out. By the fall, James had settled into prison life. The only thing that bothered him was that there was no news from the outside. In July, he congratulated Kelly on her 4th birthday by writing a letter, but got no reply. Mom was missing too, which was strange. Her cell phone was disconnected. She didn't answer her home phone for some reason. He even tried to call Daria to get some news, but she persisted in not picking up the phone and ignored the messages. It was obvious they hadn't been read. James' buddies picked up the phone, but said that they didn't know anything about any of his family and didn't talk to anyone else until October. James received a long-awaited letter from his mom. But perhaps it was better to remain in ignorance of events at home, because there was nothing a man in prison could do. And that feeling of utter helplessness. In her depressed mother wrote this, "Dear James, I didn't want to bother you, but Kate insists. Do you remember your Aunt Kate, my cousin's sister? I'm staying with her now, don't worry. Just please, I'm fine. Except I don't have anywhere else to live. I had to come here because your Doria went crazy. I can't think of another word for it. When you were convicted, she kicked me out. I was Kelly. I had the keys to your apartment, didn't I? Doria came home and started yelling at me. Get out of here and don't ever come back. She started poking and prodding for some reason. She was so angry. I only had time to ask her, what did I do wrong? Daria, I don't understand. I've always helped her, and she doesn't listen, like she's possessed. She kicked me out, took me right off the stove. She didn't understand anything. Poor thing was crying. My heart still breaks when I remember. I had to leave so I wouldn't scare the little one by screaming. I went straight to the daycare center to look at her. I raised her, putting her on her feet, teaching her to walk. My little one, my grandma saw me at the daycare center and screamed and laughed. We talked through the fence, and the teacher took her away, apologized. In front of me, she said that Daria forbade me to go near the child, and she's the mother. Her word is law to them. And she frightened the teachers with her connections, that she'd be fired from her job if anything goes wrong. So that's how I live without a ring. Now I don't know anything. Daria's not answering her cell phone. And then she did this. James, no, we have more apartments. Daria took both yours and mine with power of attorney. She came to my place and kicked me out. There's a piece of paper that says you signed your apartment over to Kelly. But I would have believed it. I wouldn't have argued. But there's a second power of attorney in my name to Daria, like I signed the apartment over to her. I went to a lawyer, told her I could try to contest it. At least it's signed by me. I don't know how she forged it, but I'm sane. I've never been declared incompetent. So I could change my mind and revoke the power of attorney for my apartment. We were preparing documents with a lawyer to file a lawsuit. But then Daria came to me with her lawyer. I think it's her new beau. She's been hitting on him, and he's got a shameless look in his eyes. He says, "Keep your head down, you old fool. It'll be worse. I'll give you a life. I'll tell him you poisoned Kelly. You remember, she was sick. She had diarrhea recently. So I'll tell her it wasn't an intestinal infection. It was you slipping the kids some nasty stuff. In retaliation for my testifying against your son in court, James, I'm just numb with horror. What could you possibly think of? And she gets it. And by the way, think about your son. Otherwise, a criminal came up to him in the penal colony, stabbed him with a knife, and that's it. James, I was so scared. I left my apartment to her. I stayed on the street in my old age while I stay with my sister. Write to me at this address. When will they let you out? Can't we think of something? We'll take the apartments back, although the neighbors say she sold them already. The new tenants have moved in. Reading this, restrained. James usually screamed with impotent rage. Nick ran into the cell. What are you, paparazzi? That was the nickname James had come up with, even though he wasn't what they called a photographer who went after celebrities. But that's what the Khans had come to associate with his profession as a journalist and his work at the local TV station. Oh my God. Mom finally wrote, "It's horrible in there." And James recounted the contents of the letter to Nick. So I'm going to introduce you to a fellow. Maybe he can help you with something. And that's how James met David. He was just over 50 years old. He was a big man with an unusual fate. He lived in a town with factories called Big Chemical City because it was built in the 70s with a large chemical plant. By the 90s, the settlement was more like a big crime town. There was a big organized crime ring run by David. He protected local businessmen, ruthlessly killed those who refused to pay him, as well as rival leaders of other criminal groups. But to prove his involvement in the brutal beatings and murders, could not for decades missing people just disappeared without a trace. It was only a few years ago that David punctured, flared up, and shot a man in broad daylight in a cafe in front of multiple witnesses. It was his longtime enemy, a criminal mastermind, always looked down on David. He was sampled for DNA testing, something they didn't do in the 20th century. The technology hadn't really caught on yet, so they found DNA matches, but evidence from a few old cases. And the chain started to unravel. We were able to prove David's involvement in several murders. Then he's 21 years old. And what is surprising, a criminal authority with such a record of serious crimes sent to the colony to go to the garage. After all, technically before that he did not sit. At the place of serving his sentence, he arrived literally a month earlier than James. He was still settling in, but the locals had already heard about the level of the man who had come to them and behaved with him cautiously and begrudgingly asked him to solve some issues. James also approached David with his problem. "I'll see what I can do," he promised. "You see, it's too early to make a big deal out of it, and you're not going to succeed. You'll be in jail for a couple more years." Wait, a criminal mastermind. James realized it was a long shot. Who was he to be helped? But fate had it differently. "Hey, paparazzi, you'll be the third." The conspirators, James whispered to the rats. That was the prison nickname for a kid in his 20s, with an upturned face and narrow, sly eyes. He looked a lot like a rodent, and he behaved just as fussy and insistent, always hovering around amongst the important people. He was trying to take advantage of something, always putting things out there. Eavesdropping, peeping. Rumor had it he was snitching on the colony authorities. Third what? "What are you, liquor on the rack?" Surprised James. "No, not a rat's grin on his face, just cards." "What, you want to go to jail for gambling?" "So we don't tell anyone." "No, I'm out." "No, I'm out." This dialogue took place in the premises of the club, where at that time there was supposed to be a rehearsal of the ensemble created by the prisoners. But apparently, some of the musicians didn't show up, and the rest took advantage of the free time to play cards in secret. James came to the club to play table tennis. This sport was very popular in the colony. In the evenings after work, especially in winter, the convicts liked to swing their rackets in the warmth and flick the ball on the table. Sparring for lack of a gymnasium took place in the club right on the stage-put tables and cut them with excitement. Now it was just about time for the tennis players, and they were already starting to pull up. The first to plan to battle were Nick and David. They went backstage where the musicians were playing dumb and sat down to change into their sneakers, while waiting for the gambler and dispersed, so everyone stood. In the hall suddenly flew into the 3 centuries. Nobody move. Nobody leaves. We freeze and wait until we let them go. There was a stampede backstage. Several people were running towards the fire exit, which was in the corridor behind the stage. Who exactly was running? It didn't appear to be. 2 of them ran backstage and dragged Nick from there to the stage. What are you guys doing? We came to play. We came to change clothes. We're not touching anyone. He started it. Shut up. They're playing. I barked at the guard. We know you've been sneaking maps into the zone. Who brought them in? We don't know anything about the Force. Nick, yes. And the cards were for decoration. Razor and guard Nick and Dodo glanced behind the stools on which they had moved to change their shoes. Indeed, there were cards scattered about. All of them both in jail for 15 days for gambling. And the men were taken away without listening to their explanations. A day later, about the lighthouse, James made a decision. He thought long and hard about what to do. The right thing to do was to keep silent or to tell the management that Nick had been falsely accused. But then he would have to talk about the rat and the guard, who did not understand the situation and threw in jail the first caught. And both sides could remind him of that. Nobody likes a snitch. No, all the same, and the truth is strength. The man remembered a famous phrase from the movie with the idea that justice must triumph. He went to the head of the detachment and told him what had happened. The deputy head of the colony confirmed what he saw. Clarified the one that played rats with someone anecdotes with Nick. Yes, James said confidently. Okay, let's not take this story upstairs. Somebody said, I believe you. I'll handle it. But he was out of jail by the end of the night. He found James himself. I'll owe you a favor, he said, dryly and seriously. Your request. I remember. I'll try to help. After that, the authority figure brought James closer to him. And after about 6 months, they became very close friends. But he shared with him that he did not tell anyone how being a boy from a poor family with many children tried to make it in the people, and at the age of 14, went to work on a construction site, as taken into the army. And at the age of 18, he went to Vietnam. He was severely wounded, and in his homeland, he received no honors and no money. Nobody wanted him. How he gathered strong guys from among the same Afghans and took control first of his native Saransk suburbs, and then part of the region. How I tried to wash away my sins and created a fund to help children with cancer, who in the 90s were also not needed by anyone. I tried to live honestly and confessed before that James, but did not give me our state with the arrangement of such that people do not live in it, and exist without rights, without prospects. So I changed everything around me that I could and how I could, he summarized, and drank a shot of vodka. And even then he could afford to drink alcohol in prison with the help of his fellow prisoners on the outside. He found something to put pressure on the head of the colony, and he was organized conditions of detention, the same as when he was free. Not everyone can afford expensive alcohol, cigarettes, cell phones with internet, and even girls penetrated into the men's prison, received guests. Yes, in the prison suite was an empty building near the woodworking shop, where the convicts worked. Once there was a workers' quarters there, and for David it was converted into a kind of trailer, in which movie stars rest during filming. There's a full stuffing of the inmates murmuring ace from the bathroom, not a shower kitchen with a refrigerator. There's even a TV. True, few people saw it in person. The authority took the chosen ones. And those did not spread neither about the interior, nor about the pastime. The most frequent guest there was James. He enjoyed a special favor and trust. David, despite the rather comfortable and privileged life in the zone. James was counting the days until the end of the term was still more than 2 years away. Kelly, it'll be 7. When I get out, James figured, she'll be the one going to first grade. Would I be able to drive her? Maybe they'll let me out early on parole. I'm almost halfway through my sentence, and then I can apply for parole. I'll have to get the paperwork ready. Slowly pondered the man, though having an influential patron in the person of James, did not allow himself too much. He behaved like an ordinary convict, didn't skip work, he played sports. Activity and initiative showed, but did not wake up, didn't start or support any conflicts. So he could well qualify for parole. And further, for the past year, there was no news. But I tried to look for her through my own channels. But she just disappeared. Mom kept trying to come to juvie, but James talked her out of it. It was too long a trip. So Jenna just kept writing and calling, asking her son how he was doing. Telling about his quiet retirement, worries, and joys, sent parcels with allowed sweets, cookies, chocolate, and to the purchased dried fruit added apples from Aunt Kate's garden. James used to add their slices to his tea. They gave not only the taste, but also the flavor, reminding him of his childhood trips, of the lightness and carefree since that time. It was his outlet in the gray of prison life. Guys, what have they done? Burst into the cell programmer Jack. He was almost crying. They killed Maria. It was early morning and the inmates were just waking up. Some went to wash, others were getting dressed. But at Jack's words, even those who were still lazily pulling themselves up in their beds had lost their morning sleep. Who killed who? Speak up. It came from all directions. Maria, it was a goat from the backyard. Even those who didn't work there knew this white, herky creature. The goat liked to escape from the pen and into the wild, to beg for food from everyone she met, to jokingly fight, squinting with a cunning eye. She was respected for her free-spirited disposition, and of course, everyone was amused by her gregariousness. Maria's death shocked the men in the enclosed space that was the colony. People are very attached to all living things. Bastards. Nick spat. She was the one who was chosen. She must have been a kind, curious soul. He spoke in a strange voice. The stern-looking trucker was ready to cry. "Come on, men, let's get this sorted out," suddenly said James, who had never been a troublemaker. But he, too, was outraged by the brutal death of a harmless creature. These words were recalled to him at the inquest a few hours later. The men's showdown ended in a mass brawl. Some yelled that they had a tradition of sacrifice. Without it, a sacred holiday is not a holiday. The defenders of the goat in response also yelled what they should do with their traditions. The stream of insults turned into a hail of blows. The prison med unit was filled with people with signs, bruises, and broken noses. One even took a bite. That's exactly how someone got revenge on his order. James was recognized as the instigator of the beating, as it was his words that were considered the impetus for the action. Many also saw him stabbing with rage. At least a few people. It ended horribly. James was charged with religiously motivated battery and added 2 more years in prison without parole. Be glad, the guard later told him, that you only got time for battery. If they'd found you the organizer of the riot, you'd have gotten more. You'd be in jail for a long time. The next 4 years James later almost erased from his memory, so gray and eventless. They were different. The man had always been quiet, even phlegmatic, not particularly sociable. But now he's withdrawn into himself. He found some consolation in living by the rules, became the right-hand man of an authority. But he only came into contact with people for business. If it was necessary to explain to someone who was guilty what he was wrong, to teach the newly arrived prison rules. He never crossed the line, never swung his fists. He tried to behave decently, at least not to earn a new sentence. Since parole was no longer available to him, he was finally released on a cloudy July afternoon, which he didn't even know how to use yet. He went to the hotel, got a room, ordered a pizza, which he had not eaten in 5 years, then lay in a warm bath. Slowly he began to get used to the reality outside the walls of the colony and the peace, and quiet without a lot of people around, and the need to follow a strict routine. He thought about the nickname. Her birthday was approaching, and James decided that the first thing to do was to visit his daughter. And if Doria got in the way of that, remind her of her parental rights. After all, he was officially the child's adoptive father. But where Doria was unknown. The next day, the man still went to his former apartment. The door was opened by strangers, who assured that they knew nothing about the former owners. The same result was after a trip to his mom's address. James could not find out anything through official channels because Daria divorced him while he was in prison, and no one had the right to disclose her data to her ex-husband. So he had to use his contacts. Yes, that one suggested the contacts of the right people, which he had everywhere. And James asked for help, tracked down the strap with difficulty. Turns out she moved to Colorado to her hometown. But judging by the information received, desires in the parental apartment, and in a rented apartment, therefore, it was difficult to find her, and the woman lived alone. It's not clear where the child was. James traveled from the train station to the house where Daria lived. James took a cab, thinking about how best to start a conversation with his ex-wife. On the one hand, he wanted to yell at Daria, find her weaknesses, get revenge for kicking his mother out of the house, and of course, get his place back. On the other hand, he imagined that in a dozen minutes he would meet his girlfriend's daughter, be able to hug her already almost a first grader, Kelly, and his heart melted. James went out to the right entrance and stopped to think once again how to behave when meeting Daria and Kelly. For about 15 minutes, he stomped under the windows, exhaled, and ventured into the dirty entryway. It smelled disgusting. There were things lying under the doors. Scary rugs. It looked very poor and neglected, not Daria's status. James thought and pressed the bell button. It was silent. Apparently, it was broken. The man knocked on the door, quietly at first, and then more and more insistently, and suddenly the door swung open. And James barely had time to bounce out. On the threshold stood a haggard woman of indeterminate years in a green washcloth. Her face was almost the same color, and her face was a greenish hue. James. Suddenly she exhaled. The man was startled. It was Daria. It was impossible to recognize the blossoming girl in the withered woman. Only her eyes had come to life. There was a change of emotion in them, fear mixed with joy. "I'll come in," only asked the man. Daria silently shunned, letting him pass. "Where's Kelly?" "No," Kelly calmly said Daria. Now James was silent, waiting for the continuation. "She doesn't live with me. I gave her to a boarding school." That is, as if her father and mother were still alive. "Well, okay, I was in jail. But what did your daughter do to scare off suitors?" James said angrily. "They don't get turned on anyway. They live to see one." "That's not the point," said Daria, and told me what had happened to her in the last 5 years. With her last beau, the lawyer who had helped her take the place away from James and Jenna. She lived with him for about 2 years. They were strapped with shared money, started a small flower business, invested in an apartment in a new building. Everything was registered to both of them. But when the lawyer decided to look for a younger girlfriend, he skillfully left Daria without money. Slowly, under various pretexts, he slipped the woman the documents that she signed without reading, thinking that this is an ordinary report. So she handwritten all the property to him. She didn't even have to forge anything, as in the case of James and his mom. Daria was left destitute and with a daughter in her arms. Her mother had died by then, and her father had started drinking and was unable to help his granddaughter. It was just dangerous to leave her with him. "I remembered your mom. Then, of course, as she cared for me, helped me, I was able to go to work then," Daria admitted. "But the train left. You can't call her for help after all." "Well, at least ask her. She loves Kelly. Maybe she wouldn't have helped your kid. Why put her in an orphanage when you have a grandmother?" "Oh, I'm ashamed to look her in the eye, James. And you from pouring sins now," said Daria. Then only he noticed that there are a lot of icons everywhere. "Sick, very sick." The woman continued. "I don't have long to live. I don't want to leave with a black soul, though I'm already going to die for murder." Daria confessed to the crime for the first time. "And you didn't kill her for nothing." "I got angry when he called me a slut and called me that. When I told him we had to hurry up, I had to pick up my daughter from daycare soon. He didn't know I was married. I pray for his soul all the time, and I can't forgive him. I can't repent in front of him, in front of you. How much grief have I caused you?" "Forgive me," said Daria suddenly, and fell from James to his feet. She hugged him behind her knees, buried her face in his face, and continued to say something coherently. "Jesus, wait, you tell me the whole story." James lifted her off his lap, supporting her, and walked her to the couch. She could barely stand. Daria was diagnosed with cancer a year ago by accident. She had taken a part-time job as a sales clerk to be able to pick her up from daycare. The job wasn't hard. It was a chic boutique in a shopping center. There weren't many customers there, and part of the day Daria just sat and browsed social networks, and for some reason she was very tired. After work, she stopped by a neighboring store to try on a swimsuit. I thought although there is no money for the resort, but in the woods with her daughter you can get out more often and breathe fresh air yourself. And the face is already gray-something, and the baby swims on the sunbathing, and in the waiting room felt on the chest on the side of some bump dense and quite large. I went to the gynecologist and he scared me and told me to urgently do an examination. He issued a pile of referrals for tests, and after receiving the results, he sent her to an oncologist. It turned out that Daria already had the 3rd stage of surgery after chemotherapy. It's all useless. There is no hope, Daria stated calmly. It was clear that she had already accepted the diagnosis and gloomy prospects. That's why I put her in boarding schools. I couldn't even cook for her. When I was going through chemo, I was vomiting, my eyes were always dark. My father came and helped, but he was half drunk all the time, and I was lying there like a wreck. What kind of family is that? What kind of care for a child? Is she better off in an orphanage? Got it? All right, Dara, let's go. Let's see how fast we can get her out of here. I'll help you with parental rights. At least you didn't revoke mine. I haven't been notified by Juvie. No, I'm not that crazy. I'm crazy, even though we're separated. And I was very mean to you. But I knew if something happened, you were the only one I could trust with my daughter. I knew you'd take care of her. You go. Now please, just get the paperwork. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not feeling well. I'm gonna be a burden on the road. She's here in Colorado. I visited her when I could. James called a cab and went to the address. The orphanage grounds were full of kids. James tried to find his daughter in the flock of girls about her age rollerblading and bicycling around the stadium. He looked at the fun in the children's playground with movable swings. She has grown up now. I don't recognize my own daughter. He smiled and went to the director. He reasoned that it would be faster that way. The director, having found out why the man had come, looked at him with a long look and asked him to sit down. Do you know? No, Kelly, she began, choosing her words carefully. Not anymore, Kelly. We had a fire last night in the dormitory. Must have been playing with matches. Or did they find a lighter? Kids, right? Investigators think the kids were hiding and striking matches in the utility room. Because it caught fire first, and there's toilet paper in there, honor and all sorts of things. It went up in flames in a flash, and the smoke was very acrid from the chemicals. Apparently, we rushed to get the children out, but we couldn't see them. There was a thick black veil. We were screaming for help. Pulled out whoever we could. We couldn't save Kelly. As it turned out later, she hid under the bed, inhaled the smoke, and lost consciousness. She couldn't call for help. We found her, but the doctors couldn't pump her out. Forgive us. Cried a woman to James' words as if reached through some wall from afar, muffled with delay. Wait, is there a mistake? I just came from my mother's. Kelly, she doesn't know anything, James muttered. How long ago did this happen? Yeah, we've been trying to report the trouble at the address for a month now. We've been calling, no one's picking up. We went there, some drunk man opened the door, mooing a lot. I'm not sure he understood what they were saying. Then we tried calling again. We don't have any other numbers or addresses. We called the police. Apparently, they couldn't find the mother either. James came out of the orphanage on wobbly legs, saw the children, and almost ran out of the territory. It hurt him so much to see them. They're laughing, despite the tragedy. And his Kelly is gone. No more hope of the plans he cherished in prison, living in anticipation of seeing his daughter. How many nights he lay awake wondering about her fate. How will she go to school? What profession will she choose? Who would this girl's life marry? He was going to devote his own. And what to do now? Why live in a state of utter despair? He came to Daria. You have ruined both her and me, he shouted, choking back tears of rage. If you hadn't sent me to prison, Kelly wouldn't have gone to boarding school. I would have taken care of her, raised her. And you killed a man, and you should be rotting in juvie. And it would have been better for everyone. And my baby would be alive. Daria hid her face in her hands and howled. There was nothing left to say. Now her life was over in every sense. She had left nothing behind. Her continuation of her daughter was dead. James, however, continued to speak terrible words, reaching for the woman's name. I deserve all of this. James, I'm evil. I've brought nothing but misfortune to everyone, even the rings. Doria spoke quietly and tiredly. And I can't change anything. It's too late to fix everything. No, I have more time, and my daughter is gone. With these words, the woman seemed to have lost the last of her strength. James felt a twinge of pity in his soul. He helped Doria to the bed, brought the painkiller she had asked for. Then he went into the kitchen, made them both some tea, dug through the refrigerator, made sandwiches from what he found. But when he came back into the room with the food, Doria was already asleep. The man spent several hours sitting in a chair by the floor lamp in the semi-darkness, almost without moving. To avoid waking Doria, he thought back to that very youthful day at the cottage with Kelly and 5 years ago. That had been the last time he'd seen the girl laughing, playing with her, feeding her. It was the child's last happy day and his. Then there was the dead man, the prison. A father and daughter separated for years, never to meet again. The man wept quietly with grief. Going through the memories, he glimpsed Doria, and then something seemed suspicious to him. He didn't even realize what it was at first. Looking closer, he noticed that Doria's arm was thrown back and hanging off the bed, and the woman was making no attempt to shift. It's a very uncomfortable position. A sound sleep with a clear conscience, James thought. He walked over to adjust his arm and saw that Doria was awake. There was a trickle of saliva dripping from her half-open mouth, and no breath could be heard. Her eyes were half closed. He rushed to call an ambulance. The doctors arrived and pronounced her dead. Doria had taken too many pain pills, apparently deciding that after her daughter's death, there was nothing more to live for. It's been 15 years. James was going to celebrate his 45th birthday in a small circle. His mom, who lived with his sister in a new shaky place, was coming. Also called a couple of buddies from work with their wives. Now the man worked in the publishing house as an editor, but the main guest was to be David, his prison comrade. The criminal mastermind was being released in a few weeks neatly, in time for James' birthday of 21 convicted years. David had already served 20 in the penitentiary. The rest was covered by being in the pretrial detention center until the trial, where a day counts for a day and a half. One more person went to the party not as a guest, but on the contrary, hosted it. The hostess of the evening was Miranda, the same Miranda who clapped and James from the Institute and then hired Doria. After her death, the woman began to hurt James, realizing that this was her only chance to finally get the man of her dreams. She worked hard and diligently made sure they lived together for the last 7 years. She also got James a job at a publishing house. The work was tedious not to write, but to proofread the texts of other authors. Sometimes graphomaniacs, who also had to give a polite review in return. But the salary was very good, and Miranda wasn't bad. James was counting. Now he sort of found himself in Doria's shoes. Didn't have a passionate love for Tony. He valued him more as a good friend, a reliable partner in all endeavors. They didn't have children. James was totally against it. He considered it a betrayal of the ring. And with Miranda, he had no desire to live life together until the end. In spite of this, the joint life went on as usual. This year, they bought a house in a village not far from the city. A little settled in and decided to celebrate the anniversary there, combining with the housewarming, and even with the release from prison. My mom came a few days in advance to help with the preparations for the secret celebration. And on the appointed day, David was the first to arrive. But what's expensive? Let's celebrate the big holiday at our place. Imitating a Georgian accent, he said. I'll be the toastmaster tonight. You know my countrymen aren't clowns. I entertain guests with 3 clappers and 3 crowds. And the most important person who leads, directs all the events, all the conversations and toasts is pronounced, of course, but not as you have. Saying a few words and drinking here is a whole art. But let's artfully try you in business. James laughed. Then the other guests arrived. Miranda met the colleagues from the publishing house at the end of the subway and took them by car to the village. At the same time showed the house, a little bragging about such a solid acquisition. But with Sergei continued the conversation, holding out cognac. "Do you know that the chief of our main planted?" asked someone. "What is this to the head of the colony? And you won't believe it because of me." "Well, because he gave me such freedom with a separate house, not a cell, entertainment and pranks of all sorts." I thanked him properly. I helped him as much as I could. I solved his problems, but my life ended shortly before my release. The FSB came for him. He even as waited for them quietly went to the loaf, as they say. They thought it was me who burned him, by the way. But why should I? I had a good time with him. Now he's under house arrest. The investigation's underway, and his former deputy's new boss. He didn't touch me. He didn't make any trouble. He moved me to a regular cell and let me serve out my sentence in peace. I didn't have to talk to him about anything that wasn't meant for prying ears. The man went to the other guests. The evening went cheerfully, but dignified. Dodo observed all Georgian traditions of feast, so nobody got drunk and danced. Everyone enjoyed drinks, food, and conversation. And now my gift was proudly announced by David. Not really a gift, but an investment. "Darling, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to start your own publishing house." James didn't have anything to say, just stared at his comrade in song and surprise. "I'm ready to lend you money, to invest in the business, but we'll agree on the terms. As equal partners, I want you to develop, not just sit around in your current job. I want you to earn money, not get a salary. This is such a birthday wish to you with material help to realize. If I gave you money, I wouldn't take it. But how about investment can you agree to talk about?" He squinted slyly at his friend, looking at him with a smile. Of course, he agreed. The business quickly went uphill. Friends took first, not for the most popular literature, novels, children's books, but for scientific. They began to publish textbooks, manuals, monographs, reference books, encyclopedias, and earned a good reputation. Their editions were in many educational and scientific institutions. And scientific popular literature, competently selected and qualitatively designed. And in the household became considered a good gift. A few years later, they decided to engage in fiction prose, to take a couple of young writers to try and talents, to support and check how profitable it is to develop this direction. The matter was important, and James decided not to leave the selection of authors on the conscience of editors. He personally read the manuscripts that the publishers were immediately flooded with young, ambitious creatures, where he laughed, where he even wept at the level of skill of novice writers. But one work really hooked him. Someone under the highly original pseudonym Masha Ivanova sent a manuscript, every line of which seemed to James, coming from his heart and future-long memories. Mom didn't love Dad. She used him. And I loved him. Mommy made Daddy go to jail. In her place, Mom stole my grandmother from me and my grandmother's apartment. Mom stole everyone I loved and put me in an orphanage. Mom's dying, Grandpa's drinking. How can I go on living? The text was written on behalf of a little girl, but with some very adult feelings. It was reminiscent in style of Over the Rye or Naive. Super. And the more James read, the more he was struck by how the story resembled his life. There were a lot of nuances that only a man could know. Even to himself, he didn't even say her name. The narrative was abstract, modernist, a bit confusing, but very addictive. And the man couldn't understand why. Because the work is well written and worth an edition, or simply because almost in detail describes his fate. Having finished reading, he immediately called his assistant and asked to invite the author to a meeting. A dozen minutes later, he reported back, dialed. Judging by her voice, the young girl cheerfully replied that she would come anytime, wherever she was told. Assigned her for the day after tomorrow. Based on your schedule, Thursday is almost free. James nodded and went about his routine business, but his heart wasn't in it. The soul was out of place. What if it was Kelly's? For the first time, he mentally dared to say that name. Of course, it was very foolish of him to hope for what had happened. A miracle, and the daughter was alive. After all, he had been to the orphanage himself, talked to the director. Why would she lie? But maybe she got it wrong. Maybe Kelly didn't die. James started thinking, what if they couldn't get through again? Daria's dead. Her father went into a drug treatment center. He died there after that. I moved away from it all of a sudden, but it's been so long. Kelly would have found me if she was alive. His head was bursting with conflicting assumptions. He regretted that he couldn't find out anything yet. After all, to wait for the meeting for 2 whole days, more the man turned himself on his mother, while he decided not to say anything about his own. Suddenly, hopes came flooding in. The elderly woman had just recovered from a terrible loss. Granddaughters all her life remembered the defenseless girl, whom she raised in affection and tenderness, and with whom fate had treated so cruelly. That is why, unlike many mothers, now she did not torment her son with questions. When will the grandchildren come? She realized that it was a sore subject for him, and she herself was not sure that she would be able to love another child as well. It doesn't matter that it's already native. On Thursday, James came to work earlier than everyone else. He hadn't slept much the night before. He just couldn't and lay awake until morning with an empty head. The night before, Miranda had finally noticed that something was going on with him. He flinched at her turning to him, completely immersed in his thoughts. But she didn't get an answer from him as to what was wrong. In the morning, James literally ran out of bed, washed his face hastily, refused breakfast, and left for work, sitting in his office unable to concentrate on anything. Listened to the wall clock ticking, counting down the time until the meeting. The girl turned out to be punctual at exactly 12 o'clock as scheduled. James heard ringing voices outside the door. His assistant came by to inquire if it was okay to let the guest in. James nodded, pretending to be immersed in studying the documents. When the girl came in, he was afraid to look up at her right away. Kelly, Kelly, he kept saying his favorite name. The silence dragged on. He jerked his head up sharply, and no, it wasn't her. It wasn't his girl. A pretty girl with hair dyed blue was looking at him questioningly and a little shyly. The girl laughed sweetly in response and suddenly sniffed her nose. And at that moment, the tension of the last few days vanished from James as if it had never existed. And his fragile hopes were shattered. But somehow it didn't hurt, as if it was a final farewell to the image of his daughter. The gentle and quiet girl introduced herself as Sophia. He invited her to sit down. The conversation came out of the blue. Sophia, where did you get such details in your book about boarding school, about your relationship with your parents? This is your personal experience. It just reminded me of a story. It's not plagiarism. The girl's eyes are as blue as her hair. I don't suspect you. Just a lot of things. The location of events in your narrative that I already know about. I mean, it echoes a story of a friend of mine. Found James. Not to tell a stranger all the sad events of my fate. The thing is that I lived in a boarding school for a long time, from the age of 7 to adulthood, and one girl told me her story. We were very good friends. James got cold. What was the girl's name? He squeezed out Kelly, which is what she told me to call herself. That's what her dad called her. James, what's wrong? That was the last thing the man heard. He woke up on the floor next to his desk. An assistant was fussing around, splashing water on him from a glass. An accountant came from somewhere and shouted towards the door, "Give us our black alcohol, and who has it?" And Sophia silently shook him by the shoulders and stared with wide-open blue eyes. God, how ashamed, James said, that I am a big man fainted. Yeah, Sophia confirmed. Her eyes were full of anxiety and unexpected concern. Apparently the nerves of waiting for the meeting had gotten to James. He stood up. He felt a little dizzy. Sanya, you're sorry, but let's continue our conversation. Tomorrow, say, he turned to the girl. I have something to tell you, and I hope you'll clarify some things for me too. The next day, they met at a cafe and talked for several hours. James told about his life, Sophia, about his destiny. It turned out that the girl had almost died in that terrible fire in the boarding school, and she ended up in an orphanage. So her parents were gone almost immediately after her birth. They were fond of mountaineering, and on a trip, they fell off a cliff. On the ground, the newlyweds who had just given life to a child were found holding hands. Which of them fell first, and which of them did not let go? There was no other way to find out, and there was no need to. The orphaned Sophia was raised by her grandmother. And when she died, the girl went to boarding school. With Kelly, they were the same age and initially talked about grandmothers. Both girls remembered with warm smiles how they had been brought up, pampered, but also instilled with rules. The girls became fast friends and chatted about everything. Kelly told about her unhappy life with her mother, who cared more about men than about her daughter, about her beloved daddy with whom she was voiced. Sophia's words and emotions were literally seared into her memory. Kelly, so sincere and all-encompassing, was the child's grief at being deprived of a normal life, seemingly simple and ordinary. But Sophia had no such life. The girl had been around orphans since infancy and did not remember her parents at all. On the other hand, her mom and dad were alive, but she still ended up in an orphanage. You can't escape your fate. James and Sophia started spending a lot of time together. They'd meet on weekends and usually just walk around town and talk. Shells first. James avidly caught every detail of his daughter's short life without him. Then they moved more and more into their current lives, talking about important and not so important events, sharing plans. Sophia was drawn to a grown man. She had spent her whole life without a father and without any close people around. She was used to relying only on her own strength, not counting on the help of others, so that there would be no new pain from the loss. And now she has support, attention, and care. Her novel was published by James and the Doctor, and the print run sold out well. James encouraged her to write the next book. "You have a good syllable, you have your own style," he noted. "You don't overwhelm the reader, but there are some very deep thoughts, which is not surprising. After all, you are Sophia. What do you mean, wise?" Sophia was embarrassed, though the praise was gratifying to her. That evening, they were cold for several hours of walking, for it was already late October, and the girl agreed to come to James for tea in the city apartment after his move to the village. And as it happened, it was not the drink that warmed them, but their embrace. After that night, they became a couple. Of course, there was gossip at the publishing house. He found a girl who could be his daughter. As if women didn't start out enough. He left Tanya, he picked up another one, and she followed him around. She'd give him this and that, and caressed him, and always have dinner with him. "They're ungrateful men," summarized the third. But the girl thanks him, apparently diligently, for the fact that he so promotes her. It is without ancestry, without a tribe. I've already turned in the drafts of the second book, and James and Sophia were just good together. Despite the significant age difference, he was 49 and she was 26. His loved ones were understanding, happy that the man had found his happiness after so many years of hardship. Even Miranda accepted the situation, watching how James changed from a lost man, coming to terms with a bleak and joyless life. He has become an optimistic man full of plans. Friends, girls too, were quite favorable to her beau, found common topics for conversation, and gladly came to visit in their cozy apartment, which they recently bought, and the cottage in the village, which they bought with Miranda. James left the woman as a token of appreciation for the years spent together. About 6 months later, they got married, and this time, even though they're teasing each other, they followed all the signs. In the witnesses took the girlfriends Sophia and David, who served 20 years in prison. Now it's like he's speeding up his catch-up. He got married and raised twin boys. At the wedding, he again volunteered to be a toastmaster, and the holiday was a success. All them long remembered the intricate Georgian toasts and the general clamorous, but without excesses atmosphere. A year passed. Sophia came into the room for tea. "Let's have coffee," James replied. "I still have an hour and a half to work, would be almost finished. A couple of pages left." James was writing a book about his life. Sophia had convinced him that an experience like his should not be lost, that his story was unique. Maybe warning someone against blind love will help them appreciate what they have and give them hope that everything will be okay in the end. Sanja, so there will be a happy ending in my book. Remembered now her words about a happy ending. James winked at Sophia and came close to him, took his palm and put it on her stomach. "There, you feel it." He looked up at her with happy eyes. Sophia, it's true. I'm so glad. Who's a boy or a girl? I don't know yet. She smiled gently. Tomorrow is our first ultrasound. Let's go to meet our baby boy. James hugged Sophia tightly, closed his eyes, and felt tears of happiness run down his cheeks.